Hey, welcome to another week of Mind Games. This is our series based on the book Bad Thoughts by Judah Smith and Les Parrott. And this week we're going to be diving into another one of those toxic thought patterns that has to deal with our compulsive need for acceptance, or another way we could look at it more specifically is people pleasing. My guess is as soon as I said people pleasing, some of you went, uh-oh, this is the week for me. Because we're probably, if we're all honest, we've all had moments where we've done things, said things, affirmed things, or didn't address things, all because we wanted to fit in, all because we wanted to be accepted. We wanted other people to like us. I know for me, my freshman year of college, now I have to preface, this was before I met Jesus, but my freshman year of college, after a football game and a day full of what people did at WVU football games, we were walking by a famous landmark in Morgantown called Law School Hill. It's this big, gigantic hill. And I'll never forget, I was hanging out with a bunch of juniors and seniors in college. I was a freshman, and they convinced me that for a Stromboli, a bag of chips, a case of beer, and like $20, that they'd give all that to me if I would roll down that hill for their own enjoyment. And of course, I decided to do that. Why? Well, because I wanted them to laugh. I wanted them to like me. I wanted them to include me in their group going forward. And I'm sure it's not just me. We've all probably done stupid things just to ensure people like us or that we fit in with certain crowds. These people-pleasing behaviors show up in so many different ways. For some of us, it's not just rolling down a hill when people want to laugh at you. For some of us, it's saying yes and overextending ourselves. Sometimes it sounds like apologizing constantly when you didn't even do anything wrong. Sometimes it looks like agreeing with others' opinions that you really don't even share. Another story from my freshman year of college, I guess I had a major need to fit in. I remember for a whole football season, I pretended to be a Pittsburgh Steelers fan just so I could watch the games with my next door neighbors who were Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Sometimes we'll hide our own true preferences, or maybe at work you take extra shifts or you stay late, not because you want to, but because you're hoping that you can garner approval or acceptance into a group. Sometimes we'll give false feedback. When something really needs to be said, maybe we'll hold back and we won't really address the issue. Other times we might not hold other people accountable. Sometimes you might do stuff that you don't want to do just because you feel guilty or pressured. And for a lot of us, people pleasing shows up as not letting people know when they've actually hurt our feelings. These unhealthy behaviors are present when we are afflicted with what we'll call tonight the disease to please. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25 says that fearing people is a dangerous trap. See, we're all inherently people pleasers, and what the Bible says is that that's a trap. It's a trap that we cannot fall into. And so I start with this question. Why is it that so many of us are afflicted with people pleasing? Where does it actually come from? Well, what we know is that we're all born with an insatiable inner need for meaningful interaction with others. I'm reminded of Genesis chapter 2, where the Lord God said, it's not good for man to be alone. And I know that this was in regards to marriage, but we know that the way that God wired us was not for us to be alone, but for us to do relationship and have connection with other people. It's how we are wired. We are made for community and for relationships. We are made for those. It's how God, our Creator, wired us. In fact, if you consider yourself a Christian, if you try and live the Christian life all on your own, you'd have to neglect over half the commandments in the New Testament if you decided to do life all on your own. It's meant to be a communal thing. It's meant to be a thing that's lived out in biblical community. It's not meant to be practiced alone. In fact, I would just argue it can't be practiced alone. And so our natural wiring for connection is why the philosopher John Donne is so famous for saying that no man is an island. So what does people pleasing really come down to? I said it earlier, but let me remind you, why is it that we want to people please? It comes down to one simple answer: acceptance. We are all wired to want to be accepted by others. Now, let me put your mind at ease before you think, oh man, I've really messed things up because I'm a people pleaser. In its purest form, people pleasing is actually coming from a good place. Nobody really wants to be a disaster that like nobody likes, you don't fit in, and like nobody wants that. So your desire for acceptance, your desire to be part of something comes from a good place. We know people that are kind of a disaster, and you go, that's not what I want to do. That's not the healthy alternative that we're looking for here. The drive to please others is not inherently bad until it actually becomes a compulsion. It's when it goes beyond just trying to do nice things for other people and try to be an accommodating person. It's when it becomes a compulsion. It becomes your whole personality is I need to fit in. I need to be accepted at all costs. So it begins from a good place, but when you overextend yourself, pleasing becomes more of a compulsion, and it actually distances you from your truest self. And that's actually where the trouble begins. So in other words, you're actually sacrificing who you actually are simply to win the approval of others. It doesn't sound like a very good deal, does it? Here's the point. Approval over authenticity disconnects us from our true self. So the question that we're left to wrestle with is this. For those of us that are people pleasers, and maybe you say, I'm committed to this, are you willing to trade superficial approval for real connection? Because real connections are built on honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. In a true relationship, you don't have to hide who you actually are. It's actually the difference. This might be a silly illustration, but it's the difference between dating and marriage. See, in dating, we want to be on our best behavior all the time, whether that's who we really are or not. But in marriage, you kind of see the real person, right? You wake up next to them, their hair's a mess, both of you have bad breath. That's the real, most honest version of you that they might not see in the dating phase. It's a silly example, but you get the point. Healthy relationships require honesty about who we are, what we want, and what we are willing to do or not willing to do. Listen to me here. If you have to suppress any of those things in a relationship, then you are in a self-seeking, superficial relationship. If you have to suppress any of those things, you're not in a healthy relationship. A major factor in curing the disease to please is going to come down to this. Are you actually willing to risk losing someone's approval or acceptance? If you're not willing to do that, people pleasing is going to be a problem for you for the rest of your life. But when you come to terms with the fact that I am okay with not being accepted, I'm okay with not being liked by absolutely everyone. Again, I'm not saying go and be a disaster of a person that nobody can stand. I'm saying you just can't live and die with the acceptance and approval of others. If you can't come to terms with that, it's going to be a struggle for a long time. Because what we're really talking about when we say that we desire acceptance, is there something even a little bit more deeper there? It's actually a fear of rejection. To get out of people-pleasing mode, you're actually going to have to cultivate something quite courageous, and that's the courage to disappoint. I know some of you, your heart probably started to race. You said, what do I say? The only way to get out of people-pleasing is to have the courage to disappoint. I've lived my whole life trying not to disappoint people. And now you're saying that's going to be the secret to setting me free? Yes, you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that you are going to disappoint people. Not that you should do it on purpose, but it's going to happen. It's not an easy thing. In fact, all of us are probably quite averse to disappointing other people. It's particularly hard for me as a pastor. There's so many needs that people want that it feels very difficult. And some of them are really dire needs, and there's spiritual needs, and there's relational needs. And it feels like, man, if I say no to them, what's going to happen if I say no? It's a very difficult thing. And I'm sure you have your own version of that in your life. Like disappointment, it seems like there's a landmine around every single corner. But if you're not willing to disappoint others, here's what's actually at stake. When you stop trying to please everyone, you will actually make space for the right people to connect with the real you. Doesn't that sound like the way that you want to live your life, for the right people to connect with the real you? That sounds more enjoyable to me. Wouldn't you rather be included and approved by others for who you actually are, not who you pretend to be? Kind of reminds me of the Old Testament story where Jacob and Esau's father Isaac is wanting to bless Esau, the oldest son. And Jacob decides to dress up like his brother Esau and comes in and steals his blessing. It reminds me of that story because the truth of the matter is it's impossible to actually experience true freedom while you're living a lie. God had already said that Jacob would receive this blessing, but he went in and got it through dishonest means, and it actually cost him greatly. He had to leave his home, had to leave his family, had to leave his friends and go and start over in a new place. He paid a big cost for going and faking who he was. It cost him, even though it might have looked like, yeah, I got the blessing. So here's a question I want us to wrestle with. What do you think is really going to happen the first time that you decide to say no, or that you don't meet their expectations? Can I take the mystery out of what's going to happen when you decide to live this way? Here's the first option. You're out. They go, you know what? I no longer have any need for you. I no longer need to be in a relationship with you. And honestly, if you're in a relationship that is so superficial that as soon as you set up a healthy boundary or say no, that's a relationship that you should be fine living without. So you'll either be out or you'll be in, and it will be the real you that got in. It'll be not the fake version of you, not the people-pleasing version of you, but you'll actually be in a real, true relationship for who you are, not for who you pretend to be. Because here's the deal. Real friends will stick around regardless of boundaries or disappointments. Your real friends will stick around regardless. If you have to say no, if you have to set up a boundary, or even if you have to disappoint them from time to time. If you disappoint a friend or set a boundary with a real friend, they will respect that because they want what's best for you. If you try to do the same thing in a superficial relationship, you're actually headed for trouble, because superficial relationships are actually one-sided. You're expected to do certain things or play a certain role, and if you choose not to, then they'll decide, I no longer need you anymore, and they'll discard you, and they'll move on to the next person that they can actually manipulate in a new relationship. So as soon as you no longer meet their needs in a superficial relationship, they're done and on to the next. It reminds me a lot of what happens sometimes in the church when people go from church to church. When a church doesn't meet their needs, they'll go and see if they can find another place that will put them first. And it can be a really damaging thing. But we see this all the time in friendships too. If you're in a relationship with someone that's more of a manipulator, if you stop letting them abuse you, they'll just move on to the next person that's weaker than you and begin to manipulate them. Here's the bottom line. People that have your well-being and best interests at heart will understand when you have to set a boundary. If not, they are not your people anyway. They're not your people. Do you understand that not everyone is your people? People-pleasing gets really, really sneaky, though, because it actually sounds like the right thing to do. When I say not everyone is your people, you go, well, wait a second. I thought, like, as a Christian, I was supposed to go out and be kind and generous and loving to all these people. It gets very sneaky because on the surface, it looks like the right thing to do. It's almost like a natural knee-jerk reaction for a lot of us. And here's why it's so sneaky is that on the surface, people-pleasing seems noble. It seems positive. And then if you add in the factor that maybe you're a Christian watching this, I believe a lot of Christians have come to the idea falsely that Christian means that we have to let other people impose on us and take advantage of us. Or we think, yeah, Jesus was a people pleaser. And I'll tell you this, I don't think that there's any one that could truthfully read the Gospels and think that Jesus was a people pleaser. There's just no evidence that was the case. Think of these instances. Jesus cleanses the temple with a whip. He calls the Pharisees hypocrites and whitewashed tombs. He heals on the Sabbath repeatedly, even though they told him not to. He claimed to forgive sins, which the Jewish people didn't take too kindly to. He constantly challenged the status quo. He wouldn't perform signs and miracles on demand. He didn't heal absolutely everyone that he came in contact with. He just wasn't the Messiah that they were looking for. They were looking for a political Messiah. He was a spiritual Messiah. In fact, in one of his more famous sermons in the Gospel of John, it's recorded that he had this big crowd one day show up, and he begins to preach this sermon where he essentially says, "Eat my flesh, drink my blood. If you don't do that, you can have no part of me." And it says that the crowd left him. Over and over, he challenged the rich and the powerful. He talked to people that he should not have, and he hung out with people that the religious elite said, no, they are out of bounds. And so when you look at this, the truth goes like this. Jesus was not a people pleaser. And people pleasing is not a fruit of the Spirit. You're not just living out your Christian identity when you're people pleasing. And to go even further, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, also not a people pleaser. They tried to kill that guy everywhere that he went. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, he actually writes, obviously I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. Because if people pleasing were my goal, I would not be a servant of Christ. Now you may be wondering, well, how does this factor into my Christian identity? Are you called to serve others? Yes. Are you called to love? Yes. Are you called to charity and kindness? Yes and yes. But you are not called to do so at the expense of your own well-being. We're not called to live in ways that just are not wise. So when these things that you do, when they come from an unhealthy place, what happens, it actually becomes all about you. Your people-pleasing on the surface looks very Christian or very moral. But if you're being honest, if your motive behind everything is acceptance and approval, then what's driving it is not your Christianity or your morality. What's driving your people-pleasing is actually your ego. It's actually coming from a negative motive, even if the product of it seems noble on the surface. It's actually not a genuine manifestation of the fruit of the Spirit. So you may be wondering, what are some specific examples of what people-pleasing may sound like? Like, how do I know if I'm afflicted with the disease to please? Let me give you a couple statements that you can think about. Have you ever thought or said these things? First, I need to be liked by everyone all the time. Or how about this? I can't disappoint anyone ever. I can never hurt anyone's feelings. I can't say no to anyone who needs help. I must have a lot of likes for every social post. I can never be a burden to others. I need to be what others want me to be. In essence, people-pleasing is saying, I must be appreciated, accepted and approved, included, liked, or valued, or else I'll be worthless or I'll be rejected. At its core, people-pleasing says, if I'm not approved, then I am worthless. So let me put your mind at ease. I'm going to tell you a couple statements that are true that I hope that you really take to heart. You don't need everyone's approval. You can and you will disappoint people. You will hurt people's feelings. Not intentionally, but it will happen. By trying to not be a burden, you yourself actually then become a burden. And you don't have to contort yourself into someone you are not just to be appreciated. Let me just set you free with those truths. There's actually an interesting paradox in all of this that we've been talking about, though. Each of us, as we've said earlier, has a natural and deep-seated need to be known. And yet we also deeply fear rejection, and so we also have a need to remain hidden. We long to be known, but we fear being known might lead to us being rejected. We think that if this person knew the real me, they would never accept me. I don't really care what anyone thought about the masks during COVID. I think that we can all kind of agree that it sucked having to wear a mask all that time during COVID. It was miserable. You couldn't breathe. I had to get on some flights during COVID. You're having to wear a mask while you're up in the air. It was so miserable. I hated wearing masks. And yet, many of us still wear masks all day, every day. We try to hide who we really are and what we really want. Sociologists actually call this hiding behind a mask. They actually call this impression management. You know what the rest of us call this? Pain. The psalmist writes in Psalm chapter 32, verse 5, says, "Finally, I confessed all my sins to you and stopped trying to hide my guilt. And I said to myself, I will confess my rebellion to the Lord, and you forgave me, and all my guilt was gone." So as soon as he confessed and brought everything out into the light, his guilt was gone. John writes in 1 John 1:7, "If we're living in the light as God is in the light, we have fellowship with each other, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin." So when we bring the realest us out into the life, it says that we can actually then begin to have true relationships with other people. See, impression management will actually work for a while. You may even have seasons where you feel like you've really made it. You're in, you did it. But the truth is, you will never be whole. You will never be completely healthy as long as you're wearing a mask. And you'll never enjoy true connection as long as you're not the realest you. See, when our inner self and outer life don't match, we end up with a fragmented or an incongruent self. You actually, what happens is you become obsessed with the impression that you are making on others, and you become consumed with worrying about what others think about you. See, a chronic people pleaser can never actually be known, never truly be known. And so we've set up the case. I'm a people pleaser, maybe you're a people pleaser. So now here's the question. How do we get out of this? What is the cure? How do we break the curse of people pleasing in our lives? And this is actually where it starts. Healing in your life will begin when you begin to face the parts of yourself that you've been ignoring or repressing. Listen, no matter how nice we may be, we all have a dark side. When we accept this ugly truth about ourselves, we make way for growth, healing, and health. We have a shadow side. See, everyone has tendencies toward meanness, selfishness, envy, materialism, cruelty, dishonesty, lust, irresponsibility, and so on. In fact, the more of these miserable parts we have, and the more that we bring them into the open, the stronger the potential for goodness in our lives actually becomes. Why? Your character is actually hammered out, not in the absence of these negative traits, but because of them. Struggle with selfishness leads to generosity, not generosity under compulsion, but true generosity. Struggle with pride can lead to true humility. Struggle with insecurity can actually lead to a rooted identity. Struggle with anger can actually lead to self-control. Here's what I mean. Virtue is not simply the lack of vice in your life. Virtue is the product of wrestling with vice. Virtue is vice redeemed and transformed. Virtue is not the absence of vice. It is the redemption of it. So the first thing, if we want to get out of people pleasing and stop living and dying by the approval of others, is we have to admit we have a dark side. We have a side that we're not real proud of, and it's true of all of us. We actually arrive at the virtues we're seeking to find through struggling with our vices. We don't magically stumble into these healthy attributes. And because they're produced through this process, they come about more naturally and they're not forced. Remember, why you do what you do matters. Your motive matters. And so people pleasing is you doing for others with bad motive. People pleasing serves others with really you being the end goal. But true Christ-like servanthood actually comes from a different place. However, to make our own bad side means that to own up to our bad side, that we have this shadow side, it actually means we have to take off our mask. It means that we have to be open and honest in relationships with people. And it means that you have to risk rejection and disappointing others. Healthy and authentic people come to terms with their rotten parts, eventually learning why they have them, and most importantly, how to transform them as best they can. Curing the disease to please begins with this. You need someone that you trust that you can be your truest self with. Sure, it can start with a professional counselor, but eventually this needs to be a person that you care about, and you're going to need to trust them to contain your honest confessions. See, you will never be known, truly known, until you share the parts of your heart that hurt, or the part of your heart that hides the dark parts. This is why James says in James 5:16, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results. In being known, there is an element of risk, sure, but it is the requirement and prerequisite of being known. And being known is actually essential to truly being loved. It goes hand in hand. See, if people-pleasing has led to others loving you, you will come to realize that they are loving a false or a hidden version of you, and that love will be short-lived and will not ultimately satisfy or fulfill. You will always know that they love a fake version of you and not the real you. The only way to break free is to let them love the real you. This is why the love of God is so remarkable. It's because God knows everything about you and still loves you. And yet we have decided to hide and people please because we're terrified of rejection. And vulnerability sounds like a buzzword these days, but it is said far more than it's actually practiced. I love what the author C.S. Lewis said about love. He said that to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to be sure of keeping your heart intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safely in the casket of your selfishness. And in the casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will not change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, and irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from the dangers of love is hell. There's something far more heartbreaking than rejection in life. And that would be for you to live your whole life with no one ever really knowing the real you and being able to truly love the real you. It is actually authenticity, not people-pleasing, that leads to being truly loved. So you want to get rid of people-pleasing in your life? Cultivate the courage to disappoint. Realize that you're not always going to make everyone happy. And decide that you're only going to settle for relationships that you can be the realest you in that relationship. If you will do these things, you can find freedom from your people-pleasing, and your life will never be the same.